When I read this story, I remembered how my mother would come home from work tired, disappointed, and silent. The story isn't just for use, it's about real experiences, about how you can go from being just an employee to being the last straw. Everything is fiction, names, companies, addresses, but the feelings are real. And if you ever felt you like being used, this video is for you. Don't repeat other people's mistakes.
I'm sorry, but your promotion was lost in budget cuts, Ava said with a smile so practiced it felt Botoxed. She said it like we were discussing lunch plans, not gutting 6 months of work. I was sitting in HR's glass coffin of a meeting room, still clutching the project brief I'd finished at midnight. My name wasn't even on the new org chart she slid across the table, just role consolidation due to fiscal alignment. I wasn't being fired, just erased, neatly, silently. And the worst part? I saw it coming. But if you've ever spent your career being the person who reads the fine print, who writes it, then you learn something most people don't. Silence doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes silence means the clause hasn't triggered yet. Hey, if you've made it this far, do us a quick favor, subscribe and like the video. 97% of people listening don't, and this really helps the team keep bringing you more stories like this one. Now back to the day they tried to demote me without firing me. See, for 6 years, I led license compliance and IP enforcement at Keyron Software. It wasn't flashy. No press releases, just complex client agreements, intellectual property audits, and billion-dollar companies that couldn't afford to trip a clause. When Baxter Logistics, our biggest account, needed a licensing exemption for cross-territory rights during a merger, they called me. Not legal, not sales. Me. They trusted me because I never left them exposed, because I fought quietly to embed protective language into every version of their agreements, because when they needed someone to explain why Section 9.4b existed, I didn't flinch. I wrote it. But no one inside Keyron ever really understood what I did. To them, I was the background process, the red lines girl, the we'll loop her in if legal gets messy fallback. I didn't care. I didn't need applause. I needed clarity. Clarity like this. In 2020, I had embedded a clause into all high-value license agreements. Any removal, reassignment, or status change of a designated critical account liaison would trigger a royalty escalation of 3.8%, retroactive to contract start. It was built to protect client relationships from exactly this kind of nonsense, a hedge against companies treating client trust like a line item. And yes, I had made sure that delayed promotion counted as a status change if it interrupted client continuity. It took me 3 months to get that language past legal, but I got it. And now Ava, in all her latte-scented, clipboard-carrying detachment, was telling me it's nothing personal. I smiled. Of course. I didn't mention the licensing export I'd run last week, didn't bring up the October email from legal confirming I was still the listed contact for Baxter. Didn't mention the PDF I'd quietly stored in my personal drive, highlighting clause 9.4b in yellow with my name digitally stamped in the approval chain. I let her finish her HR script. Then I walked out. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I forwarded one email, then another, both to myself, blind copied to a third-party address, the one tied to the attorney I'd quietly consulted 6 months ago, just in case this exact stunt ever happened. You don't spend 6 years writing contract armor for other people without learning how to wear some yourself. By the time I got home, I had already drafted my update to Baxter's legal liaison. As of today, internal designation on your account may be impacted. Per our standing agreement, this constitutes a personnel change. Please advise if this triggers royalty review. I wrote it slowly, carefully, no threats, just compliance language. Because here's the truth, no one in that building seemed to grasp. They hadn't shelved my promotion. They'd triggered a clause, and that clause had teeth. By March, the mood shifted like a barometer before a tornado. First came the Friday all-hands with too many buzzwords and not enough eye contact. Optimization, efficiency, evolving strategic vision. I'd heard that particular brand of corporate throat-clearing before. It always meant the same thing. Someone's about to lose their chair in the musical parade of nonsense, and no one wants to be the last one standing without a title. My director, Gina, suddenly became allergic to my name. No, loop her in. No, can you check with her? I'd built the legal guardrails that kept Baxter's contract airtight, but now it was like I'd been exiled without paperwork. No formal demotion, just erasure, quiet, surgical. The first blow came Monday morning. I logged in to prep Baxter's quarterly review deck. Access denied. Tried again. Denied. I messaged IT. No reply. By Tuesday, someone else was leading the prep call, a fresh-faced sales enablement rep named Todd who couldn't spell indemnification, let alone enforce it. Baxter's liaison asked where I was. He stammered. She's in transition. The hell I was. Then Gina emailed me a new org chart. Not even a direct message, just a mass forward with no explanation. My role wasn't listed. Instead, there was a new hybrid position under sales, handling client relationship IP comms. A Frankenstein job stuffed with half my responsibilities, all of the reporting bloat and none of the authority. And the kicker? That role didn't even exist 6 days earlier. No call, no meeting, just a slow kill. Except I'd seen this script before. I used to work compliance for a Fortune 100 before they outsourced everything and got sued into the dirt. I knew how this unfolded. But this time, I wasn't just a cog. I was the architect. Because 4 years ago, after watching Legal Butcher 3 client transitions, I'd written a clause, quietly, methodically, layered deep in our high-value licensing agreements. It was boring enough to escape scrutiny and critical enough to matter when everything went sideways. Clause 9.4b. Any material change in client account personnel without advance written consent from the client or their authorized agent would result in a royalty escalation of no less than 3.8% per month, retroactive to the last audit clearance. It was airtight. It had been approved, logged, and activated in Baxter's agreement, and I'd tied my own name to the personnel designation, ensuring I was listed as the critical IP liaison for continuity, for trust, for leverage. Back then, they were grateful, said it gave us predictable retention. Now they were trying to make me disappear without reading their own terms. Except here's the thing about being just the license girl. No one notices when you're the last line between calm and catastrophe until the clause kicks in. And promotion delay wasn't some abstract event. It was already documented in Ava's HR memo, the one she sent out to department leads with those sweet little bullets. Status: promotion pause due to fiscal constraints. No current intent to reassign client contact unless reorg approved. That memo alone triggered it, and I had it printed, watermarked, saved. Gina might have thought she was trimming the fat, but what she actually did was reroute Baxter's money straight into a penalty clause she never knew existed. They thought I was just quietly fading, but the system we'd built together remembered exactly who I was. And it was about to speak a whole lot louder than I ever had. Friday morning, 9:02 a.m., Ava's calendar ping popped up with the subject line, "Quick Chat, Budget Rollout," the kind of title that always precedes a slow, patronizing death by euphemism. I didn't bother grabbing a notepad. I already knew what was coming. She met me at the HR door like we were about to go pick out throw pillows. "Morning," she chirped, holding a tablet like it was some kind of corporate Ouija board. "Won't take long, just a few updates from finance." Her office smelled like essential oils and denial. I sat. She perched, legs crossed, posture perfect, tone rehearsed. "So," she began, eyes flicking across the screen. "As you've probably seen, we've had to implement some across-the-board adjustments. Your promotion's being deferred, temporarily. We're still finalizing reorg lines, so the title change will wait until Q3 at the earliest." She didn't look up. "And the raise associated with that, of course, will follow once we've reassessed fiscal KPIs in light of ongoing spend recalibration." I counted the buzzwords in my head like rosary beads. She wasn't talking to me. She was reciting to protect herself. That's how it always works. HR doesn't speak truth. They speak in legally padded syllables and hope you don't dig too deep. "We do want you to know," she added brightly, "that your contributions have not gone unnoticed. You're still critical to the team." That line, still critical, like a pat on the head for a dog that fetched a stick no one remembers throwing. I nodded. Not a big one, just enough to let her finish. I didn't argue, didn't ask questions, didn't flinch. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, opened the email from October 18th, time-stamped 7:42 p.m. Legal's formal internal confirmation that I was Karen's designated critical account representative for Baxter Logistics. Attached, the designation form, signed, digitally verified, logged in our internal audit system. I hit forward. To Ava, to legal, to myself, and to a private folder synced to an external drive titled Q2 Safeguards. Then I opened my laptop and downloaded a specific licensing packet from our compliance system. Exported the full Baxter Agreement archive, located clause 9.4b, highlighted it. The clause that states any delay, reassignment, or adverse modification to a designated account representative without documented client approval triggers a royalty escalation, retroactive, binding, non-negotiable once breached, and Kayron had just documented the breach. I closed my laptop, folded my hands. Ava was still talking. You understand, right? It's not personal, just numbers. The board's been anxious about Q2 optics. I smiled, quietly, kindly even, like I was thanking someone for cutting me in line. No problem, I said. I understand. She looked so relieved, like she'd defused a bomb. She hadn't, she'd activated one, because here's what no one in that room understood. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. All I had to do was forward one email and highlight one clause. I didn't even need to press send on the next step. The system would take care of that for me. Sunday night, 9:37 p.m., I was halfway through brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. Calendar ping. Subject line, Urgent IP Council Meeting, Monday 9 a.m. The invite list? Legal, Ava, CFO, no subject notes, no agenda, and no me, which told me everything I needed to know. They'd pulled the pin. And now they were hearing the whistle before the boom. I rinsed, dried my hands, and opened my work laptop, not to log in, but to verify one thing, the archive logs, specifically the version history of Baxter's license agreement. The final version we submitted after the Q4 amendment call last year. There it was. V27, final, approved. Digital signature, general counsel, time-stamped. Modification notes, clause 9.4b, accepted per client request. Designation, R. Wyatt. Me. Audit trail, locked. Immutable. Backed up to our compliance server and the external client SharePoint. They could rewrite the org chart, reshuffle roles, and issue all the euphemisms they wanted, but that clause was already alive. Not a draft. Not a theory. Activated. I closed the laptop. Didn't even screenshot it. Not yet. There was no rush. I'd already pulled those files the day Ava smiled through my demotion. Still, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew exactly how they'd try to twist this. I'd seen it before. They'd say it was an oversight, a clerical delay, that the clause was ambiguous or unenforceable in this context. They'd ask questions they didn't want the answers to and hope I'd be too grateful for the attention to press the issue. I knew what was coming next. Monday, 9:06 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus, one of the junior licensing analysts I trained 2 years back. Hey, weird question, but legal just asked if you're technically still the Baxter contact. Also, who wrote clause 9.4b? There it was. The discomfort, the cracks. I didn't reply. Instead, I went into our internal licensing admin portal, pulled the Approver History tab for clause 9.4b, screenshotted it. Approval chain. Drafted by R. Wyatt, reviewed by Licensing Counsel. Final approval. Office of General Counsel. Client. Acknowledged. Baxter GC D. Ellis. Timestamp. June 17th, 2022. I sent the screenshot to my personal archive, then backed it up to my encrypted drive. Nothing fancy. Just digital housekeeping. Marcus sent a follow-up. They're asking if you can join the 10:30 sync. Not mandatory, just helpful. I ignored it, because now the panic was real. They hadn't thought this would matter. They thought promotion delay was just a formality, just a harmless budget shuffle that wouldn't echo past the walls of HR. But they forgot what happens when the person they sidelined wrote the very structure they just broke. The system didn't forget, and neither did Baxter. They assumed I wouldn't say anything, that I'd swallow the insult, keep my head down, keep doing the work while they erased my name from the structure I built. That I'd be so grateful just to stay employed that I'd forget what my own fingers had typed into the clause library 2 years ago. But I don't forget, especially not when it comes to Baxter. The moment Ava confirmed the promotion pause, I sent the email. Nothing dramatic, no threats, just protocol. Per our agreement, changes to my designation must be documented. I remain available unless otherwise instructed. I CC'd our internal compliance archive, BCC'd myself, and crucially, forwarded it to Baxter's contract liaison, Marie Chan, and her legal contact, Danielle Ellis. Both had been part of the original contract renewal. Both had signed off on Clause 9.4b. They knew exactly what it meant. At 1:17 p.m. on Monday, the detonation happened. Karen's CEO, Jeremy Lind, received a message from Baxter's counsel marked time sensitive. The subject line was short, brutal, and final. Trigger notice received. Royalty escalation effective immediately. Please remit back pay or clarify breach. It hit the boardroom like a bomb. What legal hadn't told Jeremy was that the 3.8% escalation applied not just going forward, but back to the last confirmed personnel audit, which, thanks to my documentation, was 7 months ago. Across an $80 million account, that wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was 7 figures. CFO, what the hell does royalty escalation even mean? COO, did someone change something without notifying the client? Ava, blinking fast. We didn't fire her. We just paused her promotion. Jeremy, staring at the email, voice cracking. Are we being sued over a promotion? Legal didn't speak, because she was already flipping through my contract. She'd found it. Section 14.3F. A clean, lethal little paragraph that stated any action by the employer that interfered with the enforceability of a client agreement, especially one where the employee was a designated representative, transferred liability fully to the employer. I didn't need to say anything else. I had already done my part. I built the clause, I triggered it, and I warned them. Marie had replied too, just one line. Thanks for the update. We'll proceed accordingly under Clause 9.4b. Not a threat, a confirmation. And now Karen had exactly 2 options: pay out the escalation, every cent, plus interest, or try to claim it wasn't a breach. But that would require admitting they never read their own contracts, that they undermined the person whose name was listed as critical to client continuity. It would mean telling Baxter they'd let a junior sales rep answer legal inquiries about license enforcement because, what? They wanted to shave $12K off a promotion package? By the time I checked my phone at 3:12 p.m., 3 missed calls. 2 from Ava, 1 from legal, then a text from Marcus. Legal's asking if you're willing to clarify clause ownership, something about chain of authorship. They look rattled. Good. Because this wasn't revenge. This was arithmetic. They set the equation. I just balanced it. Clause 14.3F was one of those lines in my employment contract that no one ever expected to matter, until it did. I remember writing the draft myself during the last round of the renewals years ago. Karen was still growing then, trying to look more mature than we were. Legal let me redline my own contract because I was such a stickler for language. They thought they were humoring me, but I knew what I was doing. You don't spend years drafting protective terms for Fortune 500 clients without building yourself a few safety nets along the way. If an action by the employer results in an adverse effect on the enforcement of active client contracts tied to the employee's designation, employer bears sole liability. It was dry, dull, and legally explosive, because when they paused my promotion, Ava's words, not mine, they didn't just block career progress. They materially altered the terms of enforcement. I was no longer, by internal memo, the point of contact for Baxter. I wasn't told. I wasn't consulted. But they moved the chain of authority, and that movement made Clause 9.4b go hot. And thanks to the language in 14.3L, the fallout wasn't mine to clean up. It was theirs. When legal found it, I imagine the room went silent. This wasn't just a breach with a client. It was a breach that rebounded inward. Because while they were scrambling to figure out how my email to Baxter had activated the royalty escalation, they realized something else. They couldn't fire me to contain the damage. Doing so after the fact would look retaliatory and trigger even more liability under federal compliance retaliation statutes, since Baxter was a federal logistics contractor, which meant protected class escalation, SEC disclosure, and potentially external review. They'd box themselves in with a smile and a calendar invite. Ava's email was the nail in the coffin. Subject: Budget Update Status Adjustment. Line 3. Given this fiscal quarter's constraints, your promotion will be postponed until further executive review. Your contributions remain valued. This is not reflective of performance. That sentence alone was the matchstick. Her language, postponed, constraints, not reflective of performance, was HR's softened confirmation of unilateral action. And unilateral action, in my contract, was specifically what 14.3F was written to prevent. Their problem now wasn't me. It was the system they ignored. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and reread the email like it was a poem. Every word that once stung now read like a confession. Ava hadn't just paused my progress. She'd handed me documented proof that her decision directly triggered a contractual liability on an $80 million account. And worst of all, they didn't even know how deep it went yet, because I hadn't said a word about clause 14.3F. I hadn't needed to, but legal had read it now. And judging by the 4:56 p.m. email from General Counsel, subject line, urgent clarification request, they finally understood whose contract actually mattered. Tuesday morning, 8:41 a.m., the message slid into my inbox like it was any other Tuesday. Subject: Request for contractual clarification. From Legal Operations. To support ongoing interpretation discussions with Baxter, would you be available to assist with Clause 9.4b enforcement language? There it was. The pivot. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of their mistake. Just the legal equivalent of, hey, can you come fix the thing we broke while trying to pretend you didn't matter? I didn't respond right away. I stood up, walked to the window, sipped my coffee, let them sit in it for a bit. Then I opened a clean email tab, no formatting, no flourish, just facts. From R. Wyatt to Legal Operations. CC Attorney and Subject. RE, Clause 9.4b, Clarification. Please direct all inquiries through my attorney. As of Friday, I am no longer operating as designated representative per internal notice. Clause 9.4b remains active. No salutation, no sign-off, just contract language. I sent it. Breathed. Felt nothing. Because at this point, it wasn't emotional. It was procedural. At 4:42 p.m., my attorney, Marcia Dwyer, a soft-spoken woman who could turn a room to ice with a single paragraph, got the call. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to de-escalate the optics. Translate that into English? The client was furious. Baxter had threatened to initiate a formal breach report, which meant a disclosure to their federal partners. And no one wanted that on Karen's books heading into Q2 reporting. Marcia called me 2 hours later. Her tone was amused but clinical. They'd like to discuss a resolution package, quietly. No admission of fault, just strategic closure. Did they mention reinstating my promotion? They did. Retroactively. With back pay. They also floated a public role elevation, maybe a VP track, formal title, client-facing again. I stared at the wall for a moment. That room, that meeting, Ava's smile. No, I said. That's not what I want. She paused. So what do you want? I exhaled. For the first time in weeks, I felt it. Not just the leverage, but the clarity. I want them to admit it happened. I want severance, immediate vesting, and a written acknowledgement of their contractual failure, tied to Clause 14.3F. And I want first look rights on any IP compliance roles across subsidiaries for the next 2 years. On paper. Marcia chuckled softly. Savvy. They tried to erase me, Marcia. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm just writing the footnote. That night, I slept. Not because it was over, but because they finally knew I wasn't someone you delete with a memo. I was the reason the memo mattered. They called it a reset. That was the word Ava used in the follow-up message she didn't think I'd see, forwarded to Marcia by someone inside legal who clearly had a conscience or just couldn't stomach the hypocrisy anymore. We're prepared to offer a full reset, she wrote. Retroactive promotion, compensation correction, public acknowledgement of her strategic value, and a future-facing growth path. They were ready to rewrite history, pretend the clause never existed, pretend the Friday meeting never happened, pretend their mistake wasn't a mistake, just a misalignment of timing and visibility. I didn't reply. Marcia did. And what we proposed wasn't a reset. It was a record. Full severance, not a reassignment. Immediate vesting of all equity, as if the promotion had been processed before the breach. A written acknowledgement, internal but accessible to board governance, of contractual mismanagement under clauses 9.4b and 14.3f. And most critically, a clause buried inside their HR compliance addendum granting me first look rights on any future IP compliance or client designation roles across all Kron subsidiaries for the next 5 years. Not a guaranteed job, just a seat at the table before anyone else got the offer. They didn't balk, they folded. It was cheaper to lose me than to lose Baxter. The internal version of the agreement was signed Thursday, quietly. No announcement, no celebration. Just a final countersigned PDF uploaded to the legal vault, time-stamped and encrypted. I received my final check the next morning, with a summary sheet that noted Enforcement Compliance Resolution, full release granted. I left my badge in the desk drawer. No farewell Zoom, no last day cupcakes, no LinkedIn post full of half-truths and emojis. Just a closed tab, a cleared calendar, and a contract that still bore my fingerprints, even after I walked away. They thought I'd come back for the title. I came back to sign the clause that taught them to read, not out of spite, out of structure. Because this wasn't about revenge, this was about ownership. They offered a ladder. I wrote the foundation. The Q2 earnings report dropped on a Thursday. I didn't rush to read it, didn't need to. But habit dies hard. So around 6:40 a.m., I pulled it up while waiting for the kettle to boil. There it was, tucked under extraordinary items in the section no one talks about on investor calls. Just 3 lines, buried between upbeat forecasts and adjusted EBITDA metrics. Line 7, royalty reconciliation due to client dispute, 1.4 months. Line 8, contractual personnel realignment, see footnote 12. Line 9, clause remediation, reserve established, contingent. Footnote 12 was a masterclass in sanitized corporate regret. In Q2, Kron Software resolved a contractual matter related to designated personnel within a strategic client engagement. The resulting royalty back pay adjustment has been settled. An internal review has led to structural realignments to ensure future compliance with designation-sensitive clauses. Designation-sensitive. I nearly choked on my coffee. They never mentioned my name. Never said, we tried to cut corners and got burned by someone who knew exactly where we buried the liability, but they didn't have to. Anyone who understood the language, and I mean really understood it, knew exactly who that clause was about, knew what had happened, because language leaves fingerprints. My phone buzzed before 7 a.m. First, a recruiter from Helix Systems, then 2 messages on LinkedIn, then a referral request from a former Kron board advisor, now with a federal tech contractor. Apparently, word was out. But the one that mattered came at 10:12 a.m. Subject, well played. From Danielle Ellis. General Counsel, Baxter Logistics. Read the earnings footnote. Your clause was airtight. Smart move. I forwarded your name to our in-house IP leadership team. We're restructuring. I suspect your insight would be welcome. I stared at the message for a second, then typed 2 words. Read everything. That was it. They'd buried my promotion like it was an inconvenience. I buried a clause like it was a tripwire. One of those got forgotten. The other resurfaced, with interest.